The mist clinging to the banks of the Kuromo River is thick, unnatural, swirling around the legs of the soldiers like the spirits of the damned. It is the year 1189, in the northern provinces of Japan, a place the capital elites consider the edge of the civilized world. A battalion of battle-hardened samurai stands frozen, their knuckles white as they grip their yumi bows. They are terrified. Not of an army, but of a single man. Standing on the wooden bridge that guards the entrance to the castle is a monk, draped in black robes that are now heavy and slick with blood. He is Saito Muzashibo Benkei. He does not move. He does not breathe. He simply stares, his naginata polearm planted firmly on the blood-slicked planks, blocking the path like a gate of iron. The archers loose another volley. The air hums with the deadly whistle of arrows. They thud into the monk's armor, into his flesh, turning him into a macabre pincushion. Yet, he does not fall. He does not even flinch. The soldiers wait for the collapse, the final surrender of the body to gravity, but the giant remains upright, his shadow lengthening in the dying light. Hours pass in this standoff, the silence broken only by the rushing water below. Finally, a single brave soldier creeps forward, wind whipping at his face, and peers into the monk's hood. He recoils in horror. Benkei has been dead for hours. He died standing up. Rigor mortis and sheer, indomitable will have locked his joints into place, turning a corpse into the ultimate guardian. This is the standing death of Benkei, a moment where biological reality shattered against the hard steel of loyalty. To the Western mind, the history of warfare is often a matter of logistics, formations, and territory. We think of the Roman legions, the disciplined lines of redcoats, or the mechanized horror of the trenches. But if you peel back the layers of history in East Asia, specifically looking at the Korean peninsula and the Japanese archipelago through the lens of an outsider stumbling upon a forgotten crypt, you find something else entirely. You find a synthesis of the sword and the spirit that defies our rational categorization. Here, the lines between the priest and the killer, the beautiful and the grotesque, the scholar and the general, are not just blurred, they are obliterated. We are entering a world where poetry was written in blood, and where the aesthetic of death was as important as the victory itself. Consider the atmosphere of Silla, an ancient Korean kingdom that rose to power in the 6th century. Imagine walking through the capital of Gyeongju. The air is perfumed with incense, but beneath it lies the copper tang of polished bronze weaponry. You might expect the elite warriors of this land to be grizzled veterans, scarred and hardened. Instead, you encounter the Hwarang. The name translates to flower boys or flowering youth. To a Victorian explorer or a modern military tactician, the sight would be baffling, perhaps even unsettling. These are teenage boys, chosen for their exquisite physical beauty. They powder their faces with cosmetics. They wear jeweled shoes and fine silks. They gather in the mountains to sing, dance, and discuss philosophy. And yet, these flower boys were the tip of the spear in Silla's brutal wars of unification. The dissonance is jarring. How does a group focused on aesthetic beauty and Taoist nature worship reconcile with the butchery of ancient hand-to-hand combat? The answer lies in a darkness that Western observers often miss, the cult of the suicidal charge. The Hwarang were not just soldiers, they were spiritual vessels, believed to be incarnations of the Maitreya Buddha. When they rode into battle, they weren't just fighting for a king, they were enacting a religious ritual of sacrifice. There is a story buried in the Samguk-sigi, Korea's oldest historical record, that captures this chilling duality. It concerns a young Hwarang named Gwanchang. He was only 16 years old during the Battle of Wangsanbil against the rival kingdom of Beech. Imagine the scene, a stalemate on a dusty plain, the heat stifling, the smell of thousands of unwashed bodies and horse sweat. To break the deadlock, the Silla general sends this boy, this beautiful, makeup-wearing 16-year-old, on a suicide charge alone into the enemy lines. He is captured. The enemy general, Gaibik, lifts the boy's helmet and is struck by his youth and beauty. He spares him, sending him back to his father. But the code of the Hwarang, the Sesikoji, dictates that one must never retreat in battle. The shame is unbearable. Gwanchang drinks a cup of water from a well, perhaps washing the dust from his throat, and charges back into the enemy ranks a second time. This time, there is no mercy. The visual that follows is stark and horrifying. The beach general cuts off the boy's head. He ties the head to the saddle of the boy's horse and sends the animal galloping back to the Silla lines. When the father, General Pummel, receives the horse, he holds his son's severed head by the hair, wiping the blood with his sleeve. He does not weep in despair. He shouts that his son has died with honor. This act of martyrdom, this sacrifice of a flower, whipped the Silla army into a frenzy that annihilated their enemies. It is a form of psychological warfare that weaponizes beauty and youth, turning the death of a child into a strategic asset. Crossing the narrow sea to Japan, we find a different manifestation of this spiritual violence in the figure we glimpsed at the beginning, Benkei. If the Hwarang were the embodiment of aesthetic perfection hiding a core of steel, Benkei was the embodiment of the monstrous profane hiding a core of devout purity. He was a Sohei, a warrior monk. To the Western ear, warrior monk sounds like a contradiction. We picture the cloistered scholars of medieval Europe, copying manuscripts in silence. The Sohei were nothing like that. They were the enforcers of the great temples of Mount Hai, religious institutions that held as much political and military power as the emperor himself. Benkei's legend is painted in the colors of a dark fairy tale. He was said to be the child of a temple god or a demon, born with hair and teeth, a wild ogre of a man who grew to over 2 meters tall in an era where the average man was significantly smaller. He roamed the streets of Kyoto at night, a shadow in the moonlight, challenging samurai to duels and collecting their swords. He had collected 999 swords, a testament to 999 lives taken or ruined, before he met his match in the slight, agile Minamoto no Yoshitsune. The bond between Benkei and Yoshitsune creates a narrative archetype that resonates through centuries of noir and tragedy, the hulking brute with a heart of gold, loyal to the doomed, tragic genius. Their story is not one of triumph, but of a slow, inevitable march toward destruction. They became outlaws, hunted by Yoshitsune's own brother. The archives describe their flight through the snowy mountains, disguised as traveling monks. There is a moment of excruciating tension at the Attica barrier, a checkpoint manned by suspicious guards. To maintain their cover, Benkei has to do the unthinkable. He beats his own master, Yoshitsune, with a staff, treating him like a lowly servant to fool the guards. In a society governed by strict Confucian hierarchy, striking one's lord was a sin punishable by death. Benkei did it to save him, weeping silently as he struck the blows. It is a scene of profound psychological violence, a loyalty so deep it required the violation of the soul to preserve the body. But the sword and the spear were not the only weapons in this theater of the unknown. There is a quieter, perhaps more formidable power that emerged in the Joseon dynasty of Korea, the power of the Seonbi. If the Hwarang were the flowers of youth, the Seonbi were the roots of the old oak, stubborn and immovable. These were the Neo-Confucian scholars, men who theoretically disdained physical violence, prioritizing the brush over the blade. A Western observer might dismiss them as mere bureaucrats, soft men in high hats and wide-sleeved robes. That would be a fatal miscalculation. During the catastrophic Imjin War in the late 16th century, when the Japanese warlord Toyotomi Hideyoshi unleashed his samurai hordes upon the Korean peninsula, the regular Korean army collapsed. The king fled. The capital burned. It was a scene of apocalyptic ruin. Into this vacuum stepped the scholars. Men like Yi Huan, though he had passed before the war, had laid a philosophical groundwork that turned righteousness into a weapon. His disciples and counterparts did not flee. They organized the Wibion, the righteous armies. Picture an elderly scholar, a man who has spent 50 years reading classics and debating metaphysics. He has never held a sword. Yet, when the invaders arrive, burning villages and desecrating shrines, he stands up. He rallies the farmers, the slaves, and the local hunters. He uses his knowledge of the terrain and his moral authority to forge a guerrilla resistance from nothing. These were not soldiers fighting for pay, they were fighting for the moral order of the universe which they believed the invaders had violated. They lured samurai into mountain passes and marshlands. They fought with farming tools and stones when the arrows ran out. This brings us to the concept of the Seonbi spirit as a form of martial resistance. It challenges the Western notion that intellectualism and warfare are separate spheres. In the Confucian worldview, leading troops was not about physical prowess, it was about the cultivation of key vital energy and the embodiment of righteousness. A general who was morally corrupt would inevitably fail, no matter how strong his army. Conversely, a righteous man with a ragtag band of peasants could invoke the mandate of heaven. It is a mystical approach to logistics and strategy, where the moral high ground is considered actual high ground. This defiance of categorization extends to gender as well. The history of Asian warfare is often written by men, for men, erasing the presence of women on the battlefield. But dig into the local legends, the family chronicles of the Sengoku period in Japan, and you find figures that shatter the image of the submissive wife waiting at home. We find the onna-musha, female warriors who belong to the samurai class. Take the story of Akai Teruko, later known as Myoanenai. She was not a young girl fighting for glory, she was a grandmother, over 70 years old. When the Hojo clan besieged her castle at Kanayama, expecting an easy victory over a garrison led by an old woman, they met a force of nature. Teruko didn't just command from the rear, she wore armor. She patrolled the walls. She commanded 3,000 soldiers and held off the siege for 15 months. Imagine the humiliation of the seasoned Hojo generals, unable to break the defenses organized by a septuagenarian grandmother. She defied the biology of aging and the sociology of gender simultaneously. She utilized what the Japanese call psychological warfare, flying the banners of historical enemies to taunt the besiegers, turning their own history against them. Similarly, there is the account of Yuki no Kata during the Battle of Sekigahara, the decisive conflict that defined feudal Japan. At Anatsu Castle, she didn't hide in the keep. She grabbed an aginata, the same weapon used by the giant Benkei, and went to the walls. The chronicles describe her fighting with such ferocity that the enemy mistook her for a distinguished samurai warrior. When her husband was cut off and surrounded, she didn't weep, she charged into the fray to rescue him. These narratives are not merely stories of fighting women, they are disruptions in the fabric of a rigidly patriarchal society, moments where the sheer necessity of survival stripped away the veneer of social order to reveal the raw human capacity for violence and courage. As we wade deeper into these waters, we must confront the sensory reality of these conflicts. These were not sterile battles of maneuver. They were visceral, intimate, and horrifying. The Imjin War, in particular, was a descent into hell. The Japanese samurai, obsessed with proving their valor to their lords back home, engaged in memazuka, the collection of ears and noses. They would sever the noses of the Korean dead soldiers and civilians alike, pickle them and salt, and ship them back to Kyoto as receipts of their conquest. There is a mound in Kyoto today, the Memazuka, which contains the remains of tens of thousands of these trophies. It stands as a silent, grisly testament to the dark side of the warrior code, where the spiritual pursuit of honor mutated into industrial-scale mutilation. And yet, amidst this horror, the cultural exchange was profound and bizarre. Japanese warlords, while burning Korean libraries, were simultaneously kidnapping Korean potters and Neo-Confucian scholars. They brought them back to Japan not just as slaves, but as teachers. The very philosophy that the Korean scholars used to resist the invasion, the Neo-Confucianism of Ewon, was absorbed by the Japanese samurai class. It softened their edges, transforming them over the next 2 centuries from rough warlords into the administrator bureaucrats of the Edo period. It is a supreme irony, the sword conquered the land, but the philosophy of the conquered tamed the sword. We must also look at the tools of this trade. We spoke of Benkei's 7 weapons, the broad axe, the rake, the saw. These were not elegant tools. They were implements of destruction, designed to maim and dismantle. Contrast this with the wacha of the Korean forces, a cart-mounted rocket launcher capable of firing hundreds of singing arrows in seconds. To a Japanese samurai charging up a hill, the sky would suddenly turn black, the air filled with the screech of gunpowder-propelled death. It was technology meeting tradition, the precursor to modern artillery warfare, deployed by scholars who viewed it as a necessary evil to preserve their way of life. The narrative of unknown Asia is written in the margins of these conflicts. It is found in the silence of the Seonbi scholar sitting in a thatched hut, practicing calligraphy while the world burns around him, believing that his brushstrokes are holding the moral universe together. It is found in the heavy breathing of the Hwarang boy, wiping sweat and makeup from his face before charging into a wall of spears, convinced he is a bodhisattva destined for rebirth. It is found in the unblinking stare of Benkei, dead on his feet, guarding a bridge to nowhere. These stories reveal a civilization where the boundary between the physical and the metaphysical was porous. War was not just a political act, it was a cosmic event. To die well was more important than to live poorly. The standing death is not just a biological anomaly, it is the ultimate expression of a will that refuses to acknowledge the authority of death itself. As we step back from the riverbank at Koramagawa, leaving the mist and the ghosts behind, we are left with a lingering, disturbing question. We in the West often view history as a progression towards civilization, a movement away from barbarism. But looking at the disciplined beauty of the Hwarang or the intellectual rigor of the warrior monks, we must ask, is civilization the opposite of barbarism, or is it simply a more refined, more aestheticized container for it? When a scholar picks up a sword, or a flower boy rides to his death, they suggest that culture does not tame violence, it merely gives it a higher purpose, a terrifying beauty that resonates long after the blood has dried. The mystery of Asia is not in its exoticism, but in its ability to marry the sublime and the horrific in a union so tight, so seamless, that we can no longer tell them apart.